Thanks everybody for joining me today. I'm excited to tackle this topic. I feel like it's really prescient and it's coming up more and more. So I'm glad to take it head on and talk about it with all of you. As Rachel mentioned, I work for the Xerces Society. We're a nonprofit. We're based in Portland, Oregon. We're just celebrating our 50-year anniversary. And we focus our attention on the protection and conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. We have a number of different programs that focuses on the conservation of native pollinators. I work for the Endangered Species Program. We also work on aquatic invertebrates and butterfly conservation. And then we have a pesticide program that sort of works as an umbrella for all of these different invertebrate conservation issues. We are supported by a number of different foundations and trusts and organizations, and we couldn't be here without their support. So just wanted to acknowledge the support of all of the Xerces supporters up front. And we are also a member-supported organization. So many of you are likely members, and I want to thank those of you that are today. If you're not a member and want to help support our conservation mission, please do consider joining us and becoming a member today. You can visit the URL there on the screen. All right, so getting started here, I was excited when Rachel asked me to come talk about this issue because I feel like it's a major one. And I feel like we as a community need to have a real conversation about it. I've been working in pollinator conservation since the late 1990s. So it's been, close to 25 years that I've been working on these issues. And it has been an incredible journey. 25 years ago, if I had given a talk about bees, I probably could have had, maybe 25 people fill a room from an area. And now we can give a webinar on a subject like this. And I think we had 750 people register for this, and there's 300 of you that are here today, which is, fantastic. So interest in pollinator conservation has taken off. But unfortunately, at least from my perspective, the majority of attention seems to be focused on honeybees. The screenshot that you see here, I went in this morning and I just did a Google image search for Save the Bees. And almost every image that you see that comes up at the top is related to honeybees. Even the two in the upper left there that look like they potentially could be bumblebees, you can see that their main focus is supporting beekeeping. And I'm not trying to suggest for one second that honeybees, don't need our attention, or that we shouldn't be talking about them at all. I just don't want all of our conversation to be focused on them. And I do think that the needle is moving in the right direction, but I want to try to help focus that conversation. I think many people out there want to do something to help save the bees, and they're looking for something to do. And I think often the answer has been to become a beekeeper or to support beekeeping. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but there's just a whole host of other options that may actually be better for long-term pollinator conservation. And those are the things that I want to talk to you about today. So we're going to dive in, and I'm going to give you an introduction to North American bees, including honeybees. We're going to talk about their status and threats. So what's the story with honeybees and native bees, and what's causing that status? And then we're going to talk about solutions and actions. What can we all do to create a conservation landscape that supports all bees? So just real quick, since we have a broad audience here today, a real quick lesson sort of in pollinators. Pollinators basically help plants have sex. Without pollinators, 85% of the plants on the planet could not reproduce. And usually the pollinators, especially here in North America, are insects. There are 6 main groups of insect pollinators. Starting from the upper left, we have butterflies, and then flies. In the upper right, we have moths. In the lower left, we have wasps. In the lower center, we have beetles. And in the lower right, we have bees. And bees are really the preeminent or the best insect pollinators in North America because they're the only pollinators that intentionally consume pollen and nectar and feed it to their larvae, and they also eat it as adults. And so what this means is that bees are intentionally covering their bodies in pollen and moving it through the landscape. All the other animals that I mentioned on the previous slide are usually there just to drink the nectar or maybe to eat some pollen, but they're not actually trying to bring it back to their nest or move it around the landscape. So the fact that bees are moving pollen around the landscape really makes them effective pollinators. Where do bees fit into this picture of insect evolution? Just so we can all sort of be on the same page about where this came from. This is a phylogeny of the insect groups. And you can see if we sort of go back to 420 million years ago, what were the changes that led to the evolution of bees? And the first change that happens where you see that red arrow is the development of wings. So all bees have wings. The second sort of node that comes up on this phylogeny is folded wings, which again is around 400 million years ago. And then starting around 375 million years ago, we have the evolution of complete metamorphosis. So all of the animals to the right of that red arrow that just popped up go through complete metamorphosis. So this idea of sort of starting as a worm-like creature, pupating, and then emerging as a winged adult is something that all of the animals to the right have evolved to happen. And then the Hymenoptera, or the bees, the main factor that differentiates them from the other complete metamorphosis insects is the fact that they have hamuli. And this means that they have two pairs of wings, and those pairs of wings are connected by tiny little hooks. I also just want to note on this slide, as we talk about evolution, I put an arrow there that's really when it's around 130 million years ago when we started to get an explosion of angiosperms, or flowering plants, here on planet Earth. And that is the time when we started to see a rapid explosion of bee species on the planet, which makes sense when you think about the relationship with pollination. When most people think of bees, they think of a honeybee. And that makes sense. They're ubiquitous in our landscape. If you look at most articles that are written about bees, the picture that is shown is a honeybee. Most people have experience with honeybees. You go to a farm and there might be a demonstration hive. There might be someone that is, showing you how bees work, and you can see inside the hive, and you can watch them crawl around, and you can see the queen, and these are all really exciting things. Of course, we also all eat honey, which is a major connection to honeybees as well. They're also ingrained in our culture. There's all kinds of art and movies that have come up around honeybees, and it's been a long-term relationship. You can go back hundreds of years, and human beings have had a relationship with honeybees. So it makes sense that when most people think of honeybees, they think of honeybees. But honeybees are not native to North America. They're native largely to Europe, Western Asia, or at least this is the Western honeybee, the Apis mellifera, and to Africa. And so outside of that area, honeybees, at least Apis mellifera, the species that is most prevalent here in North America now, is non-native or was brought here. And honeybees were brought to North America in the 1600s as as Europeans started to come over to North America. They were brought for sugar, for honey, and for wax, for wax production. And it wasn't really until the 1800s and the development of some hive technology that pollination became a major focus of honeybees. I do want to note that there are stingless bees that do make honey that are native to the neotropics, so Central and South America. And there's also a large cultural relationship with those animals that are very much native to the tropical regions of the Americas. There's also a fossil honeybee that was detected in Nevada around a decade ago. So historically, at least at one time, there was a native honeybee to North America, but it went extinct, and it is not a native species now. But even though they're not native, they are amazing, incredible creatures. They have this incredible social structure of a queen that lays eggs, and all of these workers that help to feed those developing larvae and bring resources into the nest and provide protection. They have a language. As many of you probably know, they can sort of dance or communicate with each other by moving. And this allows them to recruit other individuals to large resources on the landscape. As we know, they create food for human beings and for themselves. So the reason that honeybees make honey is so they can survive the winter. They eat that honey in the wintertime when there aren't as many flowers blooming. So they have this perennial life cycle, which is very different than most of our other bee species. And then, as I mentioned, there's also a ton of cultural connections with beekeeping and with art. And honeybees are really good pollinators. They're well suited to our current agricultural system. They can be moved around in boxes. They can be they're because of their ability to communicate and recruit. They can be pulled into these large uniform resources as they learn how to extract pollen and nectar from those crop plants. And they contribute, billions of dollars to agriculture and pollinate a ton of crops here in North America. But I think it is important to note that there are some situations where honeybees aren't very good pollinators. Alfalfa is one example where the pollen is sort of locked inside of the flower and has to be pulled out by stepping on a keel. And honeybees aren't very good at that, or they don't do it. Buzz pollination is another example where the pollen is locked inside of anthers of some flowers, and honeybees, again, don't do that, but bumblebees and a number of other native bees do. And then in cold, wet weather, honeybees have a tendency to stay in their hive. They've got honey to eat. So there's no real reason, there's no incentive for them to go out and gather resources. But some of our native bees that are just starting a fresh colony in the spring when it's cold and wet have a ton of incentive to get out and do that work. So some of our orchards and other places that bloom when the weather is cold and wet benefit from other bee pollination beyond honeybees. And while most people think of a honeybee when they think of a bee, there are a huge diversity of native bees on the landscape. If we go back to this time that I mentioned with the development of angiosperms and flowering plants around 130 million years ago, that's when we start to see this huge explosion of native bees. There are 7 bee families that are represented at the top of the screen here in the world. We have 6 of these families here in North America, and this represents probably over 20,000 species of bees in the world, and around 3,600 species in the United States and Canada. So north of Mexico, we've got around 3,600 species of native bees. So honeybees, while they are sort of a poster child, they really are not a great representation of the native bees of North America. And why does this matter? Well, I just think it's really important for us when we start talking about conservation and talking about ecology and biology that we have an animal that actually, that we fully understand the animals. When we say bee, that we really understand what we're talking about, so that we can, when we work on conservation, we can actually think about all of the issues that might affect them. And since honeybees are largely managed and live in boxes, they're susceptible to different conservation issues than a lot of our native bees. And just to give you some sense of like how little honeybees represent our native bees, the red box that just showed up on the screen here, these represent some are the biggest groups of native bees that are social. So it's really a small percentage of our native bees that are actually social, and even fewer of those have sort of this division of labor within them. So they have a queen and workers. So it's really only this superfamily of the Apiinae, which includes the stingless bees that I talked about, and also bumblebees, and then some of the halictids that have this sort of division of labor, or what we call eusocial, or a more social than just sort of living in an aggregation that we can get with a lot of the other halictids, and like the Xylocopa, the carpenter bees. And then it's even more rare to have honey making be a portion of this. So to have a perennial life cycle and to make honey is even more rare. In the world, there are 5 honeybee species, and there's somewhere around, between 250 and 500 of the stingless bees that also do make significant amounts of money, or not money, honey, not money. Sorry about that. So yeah, this idea that basically we're talking around 500 species in the world out of 20,000 make honey. So this is not a good poster child for most of our native bees. As I mentioned, in the world, there's around 20,000 species of bees, 5,200 in North America, including Mexico. And then in the United States and Canada, we've got around 3,600 species. They come in all different sizes. They come in all different shapes, all different colors, and they are out at all different times of year. Native bees are also really good at pollination, and their biology is really well suited to natural areas. They live close to flowers, often in the ground, right below the flowers that they pollinate. Some are specialists on only particular species of flower or particular genera of flowers, and they're only active when the plants are active, which really helps them to be unified and to help with native plant pollination. They are essential to ecosystem function because they come in all different shapes and sizes. That matches the flowering diversity that we have on the landscape, and they help to maintain that flowering diversity as they visit those different species of flowers. While we think of pollination largely as feeding human beings, it's also really important to think about how important pollination is for feeding so many other animals. Wild bees are helping to produce the fruits, nuts, and seeds that feed most of the wildlife here in North America. Everything from small songbirds and small mammals, all the way up to coyotes and bears, have a significant portion of their diet that comes from those berries, nuts, and seeds. And we wouldn't have a lot of those without native bees. So native bees are really important to ecosystem function for all of our wildlife. Native bees also contribute billions of dollars to global agriculture through pollination and crop fields. So as I mentioned, native bees are really important for feeding wildlife. They help those plants to develop the fruits and seeds that feed wildlife, everything from songbirds all the way up to grizzly bears. So just to check in, where I hope what you've learned so far is honeybees are amazing. They're really important for agriculture. They're a fantastic hobby. We've learned a lot of them with connections to culture, and they produce honey, which is a really great benefit. I hope you've also learned that honeybees are not native bees and are also not great poster children for our native bees. Most of our native bees are not social. They don't make honey, and they hibernate. So they spend the winter sort of inactive, living sort of either in a pre-pupa or a pupal phase, and they emerge in the spring, usually for a relatively short period of time. I hope you've also learned that for our current agricultural system, that honeybees are essential. Our large monoculture crop fields are dependent on honeybees that can be moved around to pollinate those crops, especially a crop like almonds in Southern California. I hope you've also learned that native bees are essential for ecosystem function. Our diverse natural areas require diverse pollinators, and we need to maintain them. But what about cities? What do we know about cities and how important they are for bees? This is an increasing sort of focus of research that's going on. But what we've learned is that when cities are managed well, they can be really important for wild bee conservation. This is one study that took place in Michigan, and they looked at sort of increasing urbanization and bee diversity. And what they found is even in highly urban areas, you could get a really decent diversity of bees. And this differed a little bit by functional group. So these are exotic bees, so non-native bees. This does not include the honeybee. And you found that with increasing urbanization, we actually get an increase in non-native bee species. But for above ground nesting native bees, we saw an increase with increasing urbanization. And then also with ground nesting bees and solitary bees, we found an increase with increased urbanization. Interestingly, in this study with eusocial bees, like bumblebees, highly social bees, increasing urbanization actually led to a decrease of eusocial bees. So what this all means is that different functional groups of bees respond differently to urbanization, which we would probably expect. But what we also learned is that different management has the potential to change these outcomes. So if we change how we manage urban areas, we could actually help to bring in some of these eusocial bees and potentially reduce some of those exotic bees. And the ways to do that is to increase native plant flowering diversity and to increase nesting opportunities for native bees. Okay, so that's sort of the introduction and to lay the groundwork for where we are. Now I want to talk to you about the status and the threats of these bees and what we can do about it. So we've all heard about the decline of pollinators. I want to ask this question explicitly: are honeybees declining? If you look at trends in terms of the number of honeybee colonies in the world, this number is exploding. Since 1960, we have almost doubled the number of managed honeybee hives in the world. Here in the United States, we have more of a flat trend where things are somewhat stable. You can see colony collapse disorder, when we first really started talking about honeybee declines, was around 2006. And you can see since then, we've actually seen a steady increase in the number of managed colonies in North America. I do want to point out that just because we have a lot of managed hives does not indicate honeybee health. The reason that we have a lot of honeybee colonies in North America and that number is increasing does not necessarily indicate health. It actually indicates the hard work of our commercial beekeepers that are compensating for some of these declines. So if you look at this sort of post-2006, particularly here in North America, we are seeing really significant winter mortality in our honeybees. So we're losing a ton of colonies, up to 30, 40% of our colonies are being lost in the wintertime. So the question remains, like, if we're losing 40% of our hives in the wintertime, how is the number of hives going up in North America? And the answer to that is largely, at least as I understand it, that a lot of these commercial beekeepers are actually splitting their hives. So they're taking a hive that dies and they're taking a healthy hive and splitting that healthy hive so that it basically converts it into two separate hives. So that is how we're maintaining and increasing the number of managed honeybee hives in North America. I'm not trying to suggest that it's pure honeybee health, but I do think it's important take-home message that honeybees are not in any immediate threat of extinction, or is there any real evidence of honeybee decline either in or outside of the native range of honeybees. What's causing these declines in honeybees? We sort of think about this still in terms of colony collapse disorder, which is not, there's no smoking gun, there's no individual factor that's leading to these declines in honeybees. It's a combination of factors. It's a straw that breaks the camel's back scenario. And if you sort of look at the factors around this circle here, we're talking about pesticides and disease and the way that honeybees are managed and moved around the country. Probably not real great for them. Malnutrition, the fact that they're only eating a single resource, is leading to some of these declines. And the combination of all those things leads to this loss of genetic diversity, which I think hopefully we all know is not real good for long-term maintenance and health. But one thing I do want to point out is a lot of the factors that are mentioned on this slide here are agricultural in nature, right? Pesticides are largely an agricultural issue, although they're certainly prevalent in homes as well. Parasites and viruses are largely driven by the fact that they're moved around the country and disease transmission becomes easier. Rentals and migrations are because of agriculture. Malnutrition is largely because of monoculture and crop fields, and these things lead to loss of genetic diversity. So a lot of these issues are agricultural in nature. What's going on with our native bees? We've seen and heard there's tons of science going on this over the last 25 years. What we see in our native bees is large-scale loss of pollinator diversity. We've seen, whether it's vertebrates or invertebrates, we're seeing, declines. over 16% of vertebrate pollinators are threatened with extinction globally, and 40% of invertebrated pollinator species are in some threatened category as well. If we look detailed sort of in North America, we found that a quarter of our bumblebees are facing some degree of extinction risk. And when we drill down even deeper, we can look at some specific species that are particularly in trouble. Franklin's bumblebee, native to Southern Oregon and Northern California, is on the endangered species list. It's listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. It hasn't been seen since 2006, and frankly, may be extinct, although we're definitely still spending a lot of effort looking for it. The rusty patch bumblebee, once native from North Dakota over to Maine down through Georgia, has disappeared from 90% of its range. It is listed as an endangered species on the Fish and Wildlife Service endangered species list. The western bumblebee and several other bumblebee species are also in decline and are under review by the Fish and Wildlife Service for endangered species protection. And then we also have 7 species of Hylaeus, which are yellow-faced solitary bees that are native all over, but there are some species that are endemic to the state of Hawaii that are also endangered and in serious decline. So we have a number of our native bees that not only are we seeing population declines with threats, but they're actually facing extinction risk. And I just want to remind you that extinction is forever. Once a species is gone, it can never ever recover from that. Why are these insects declining? Again, this is a paper that came out a number of years ago, or I guess just last year, that coined this term sort of death by 1,000 cuts. And I think this is a really apt description of what's going on for our native bees. It's a combination of factors. There's herbicides that's taking food away. We're taking habitat away by creating lawns. We're expanding cities and impervious areas. We're introducing native plant species, which are changing flowering diversity, which impacts bees. Agricultural intensification is removing habitat. It's increasing the use of pesticides, which has long-term impacts on the population health of both honeybees and our native bees. And then climate change is making things unpredictable. It's leading to droughts. It's leading to mismatches in flowering diversity and bee diversity. And it's causing things to dry out faster. All kinds of changes happening with climate change. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about these threats. Xerces has a lot of other webinars that have talked about threats to bees, have talked about insecticides. There's just a couple things that I do want to hammer home here for those of you that may be new to a Xerces webinar. We've seen a huge explosion in use of systemic insecticides over the last 20 years. These systemic insecticides are problematic because they're absorbed by the plant and then they're expressed in the pollen and the nectar. And so bees, when they eat their pollen or they collect their nectar or they strive to bring it back to their nests, they're actually getting a micro dose of this insecticide for a very long period of time. A single application in a perennial plant of one of these insecticides can be active for 7 years or more. So this can have a really long-term significant impact on population decline. And the use of these chemicals is exploding. I also think it's important just to point out that it's not just an agricultural problem. If you look at this chart here, it draws sort of, this is not usage, but actually profit. But you see that a huge amount of profit of these insecticides comes from home and garden use, even more so than in agricultural use. This is a decade-old data, so it may have changed since then, but this report by the EPA has not been updated since 2017. So I don't have any more recent data than this, but this just should show you that this is not just an agricultural problem, it's also a problem in our towns and cities. Something else I want to point out about insecticides is that I mentioned this earlier when I talked about honeybees sort of not being great poster children for our native bees. And one of the main reasons here is that our native bees actually have different exposure pathways to insecticides than our honeybees do. So honeybees, can obviously get directly impacted by a spraying event. They're going to visit flowers that have been sprayed after the fact. And then the systemic nature that I just talked about is also going to impact honeybees. Of course, these also impact our native bees. But native bees, some of them are actually using, in addition to the flowers, they use the leaf material to build their nests. And they're bringing those leaf materials back to their nests and laying their eggs right in contact with these nest materials. So that's an exposure pathway that honeybees do not have. Likewise, 60% or 65% of our native bees are nesting directly in the ground. And so these systemic pesticides that are water soluble moving through the ground are actually moving through the nest material of our native bees. And we have very little studies, few studies have been done about the effects of these insecticides with these different exposure pathways, because we usually are just testing the effect of the insecticides on honeybees and not on native bees. In addition to that, a real quick overview, we've just seen a huge degree of habitat loss throughout North America. And on the left here, you can see this is a chart that looks at agricultural expansion from 2008 to 2012. And then over here on the right, this is a chart that looks at sort of mean bee abundance from 2008 to 2013. And you can see there's a lot of overlap here. Where we see agricultural intensification, we see fewer native bees, right? But that's not the case for honeybees. These agricultural areas are actually helping honeybees in some ways, because it's increasing our dependence on honeybee pollinated crops. So we're bringing more honeybees to those areas. So yeah, again, we're seeing a lot of converted grasslands to croplands, and then a lot of the declines where we're seeing bee declines are happening where grasslands were converted into croplands. Disease is also another factor for decline in both honeybees and native bees. But interestingly, for a lot of our native bees, particularly our bumblebees, it's actually it's potentially commercial bees that are contributing to the amplification and spread of these diseases. So this map shows where there's been a number of bumblebee species throughout the world that have been impacted by the use of commercial bumblebees, not honeybees. In this case, I want to be really clear about that. I'm not talking about honeybees spreading disease here, but commercial bumblebees that are used in greenhouses and some open field situations have actually amplified and spread diseases to our native bees all over the world, which has led to a number of species being listed as critically endangered. So one in South America, Bombus dalbomii, Bombus franklini that we already talked about, and Bombus affinis that we've already talked about. The main threat there is disease spread and amplified by commercial bees. I do want to note just that there's a ton of uncertainty around these threats. It's almost impossible to go back in time and figure out why bees have declined. And I think this uncertainty is one of the reasons why we really need to think about following the precautionary principle when it comes to bee conservation, because we can't see into the future, and it's very difficult to go back in the past and try to figure out what has happened. But we do know that there are real threats. A lot of the uncertainty around insecticides and pesticides are around those different exposure pathways that I talked about. What do these microdose of insecticide that doesn't actually kill a bee, but is what we call a sublethal effect, what are the effects that those have on bee populations? I think we know they're significant, but they're hard to measure because native bees are very difficult to study. They're just sort of living in the ground, and their populations are hard to measure, they're hard to find, and very difficult to study the effects because, well, one of the reasons is because a lot of these chemicals are just ubiquitous. They're everywhere. There's also some uncertainty around disease. Again, we can't go back and show that this disease was caused, or that this fungal pathogen caused the declines in bumblebees. All we can do is collect evidence that seems to support it. And we've done that. So it does seem that disease can be pathogenic and really important for native bee populations. But again, we don't have sort of any real clear studies about this, although more and more research is headed down this way. So again, just to summarize sort of where we're at, the threats to native bees and honeybees, pesticides are threats to both of these animals without question. Habitat loss is a huge threat to native bees, but it's probably less of a threat to honeybees because honeybees are thriving in agricultural landscapes. Climate change, without question, is a threat to all species. But I think without a doubt, when we can feed honeybees, a lot of honeybees are actually fed corn syrup at particular times of year. When you can feed and move bees around, you can help mediate the threats that climate change might have. And we can't do that with our native bees. And then again, disease is a major threat to a lot of our different species, native and honey and bumblebees. But again, when you're managing a species, you can monitor those diseases and you can treat it. It's different in our native bees where we can't monitor it and we can't treat it. So while some of the threats are the same for both honeybees and native bees, sort of where they're happening and how we mediate them are very different. And I hope that's clear. So again, just to sort of check in of where are we now? I hope you've learned, in addition to what we talked about before, that honeybees are largely a managed species and that current agriculture cannot function without pollination services from them. Native bees are wild animals. They're living sort of in the landscape, and our diverse natural areas require these pollinators. Some of the threats that they're facing are similar, particularly with pesticides and disease, although management can help protect honeybees from some of these threats in ways that it will not protect our native bees. And related to that, the locations and sources of these threats are different. Largely, the threats to honeybees come from farm-based agricultural threats, and native bees have more threats related to natural areas, invasive plant species, diseases that are happening out there, climate change, habitat loss. There are more threats for our native bees. So that's where we are now, or at least where I hope we are now. Now I'm going to explicitly ask this question: are honeybees important for natural areas? I think if you sort of look at a lot of common media and common literature, you sort of read that honeybees are super important for natural areas pollination. And this is a metadata study that happened that looked at sort of the contribution of honeybees to pollination services worldwide. What this chart shows is green are areas sort of where they looked at this, and where you see a little bit of brown is where honeybees were actually significant contributors to flower visitation in natural areas. And you can see that throughout most of North America, outside of sort of Southern California, where the almond bloom is happening, there really is not a whole lot of honeybee contribution to natural areas. I think it's important to recognize here that we're talking about flower visitation. This really doesn't say anything about actual pollination services, but honeybees are not significant contributors when we look at visitation rates in our natural areas throughout most of North America. When we look specifically at pollination, I think we can learn from this chart that honeybees are sort of average pollinators, particularly of our native plants. And if you look at this chart here on the left, you can think of this red line here sort of as an average honeybee visit. And you can see that our native bees are actually better pollinators on a per visit basis than honeybees are. Not always, right? There are some native bees that are not as good as honeybees, but the majority, especially in the sort of best non-honeybee category, are better pollinators on average. But then again, when we look at just sort of all bees, the average native bee is a better pollinator of native plants than honeybees. And there are many reasons for this, and I'm not going to get into the details of that. But I think that what I want the take home to be here is that our native bees are doing a fine job pollinating our natural areas. And the conclusions from this paper were that honeybees were consistently less effective compared to other bees when pollinating native plants, both inside and outside of the honeybee's native range. Also need to explicitly ask this question: can honeybees and wild bees coexist? And I think the answer to that question is nuanced, right? It depends on a lot of different things. I think in a lot of different scenarios, the answer could be yes, right? If we have honeybees at very low densities, we can probably get a coexistence of honeybees and native bees. But this is at relatively low densities, so only 4 colonies in an area, in a relatively large natural area. You see that visitation rates of native bees was significantly lower with honeybees than without honeybees. So the take home here is that honeybees can impact native bee visitation rates. Visitation rates mean the rate at which they're gathering pollen and nectar. And when those go down, that means they're bringing fewer resources back to their nests, and likely over the long run would lead to fewer offspring produced and a population decline. That is not what this chart is saying. I'm just interpreting this and letting you know what I think could happen if this pattern were to continue over a long period of time. We also know that honeybees can actually directly compete with native bees. This is a study that was done in Europe, so in the native range of honeybees, and it was done during a mass bloom, what the authors described as a mass bloom of rosemary. So this is sort of an ideal scenario where there's a ton of flower resources. There's, in theory, no limitation of them. But the authors, with the study they found with wild bees up here, they found a significant decrease in foraging efficiency that was higher closer to the honeybee hives. So when there were honeybee hives, native bees could not find enough resources. When they got about 1 kilometer away from those is when when native bees saw some relief from that. Interestingly enough, they saw the same effect in honeybees. So at high densities, even with a ton of resources, honeybees were actually competing with each other for resources. So high density of honeybees, even in resource-rich areas, were bad for honeybees. And so I think sort of the take home here is that high density of honeybees really isn't good for native bees, and it also really isn't good for honeybees. One of the take homes here was the authors recommended that for sustainable density, you should have no more than 4 hives per kilometer, or around 10 hives per mile squared, per square kilometer or square mile. And remember, this is where honeybees are native. So this is in Europe, not here in North America. We also know that honeybees can pass disease to native bees. This was a study that sort of looked at pathogens close to in native bees, close to honeybee hives and further away from honeybee hives. Native bees had more pathogens closer to honeybee hives than they had further away from them. It's particularly notable in Crithidia bombi, and there's a separate study over here that shows not only is Crithidia bombi sort of present in these bees, but it actually can be pathogenic, leading to long-term population declines. So these are real threats to native bees. Competition, reducing floral resources, even in sort of massively amounts of resources available. And then we're also seeing sort of, disease transmission can not only happen, but can actually be pathogenic. So we sort of know that there are these declines in native bees. We know that there are some declines in honeybees. What can we do about it? Despite the uncertainty, I think we here at Xerces and a number of other insect conservationists believe that despite the uncertainty, we need to start doing something. And I think me as a conservation biologist, which is how I approach this, is the conservation of native species and native ecosystems. I want to follow the precautionary principle so that we maintain these ecosystems and resources for the long term. And we need to start acting in effective ways now. In my mind, the most effective way to help native bees and to help honeybees is to create habitat. The more habitat that we have, the better we're going to be able to support our native bees, and the better we're going to be able to support our honeybees. Putting flowers in your yard is 100% the best way to do this. You're going to feed native bees, you're going to feed honeybees. Honeybees and native bees need 4 things. We have a ton of other resources and webinars that have been developed about creating habitat. So I'm not going to get into the details here. I'm just going to touch on the bullet points here. Bees need pesticide-free food. So plant flowers, plant lots of them, reduce or eliminate chemical inputs. This will help reduce competition. It will increase flowering diversity, which leads to an increase in bee diversity. Bees need nesting habitat. They need access to bare ground. They need different plant structures in order to build nests and to overwinter. They also need specifically overwintering areas. So they need areas that are not tilled so they can overwinter in the ground. And then also to maintain winter plant structure for those bees that actually nest in plant stems. And then finally, bees need protection from disease. They need reduced exposure to pathogens. So we need to be providing habitat, not providing bees, right? When we bring bees and move bees around the landscape, we're bringing and moving those diseases along with them. There's plenty of evidence for that. Providing habitat helps mediate that threat. Providing bees and moving bees increases that threat. Habitat is a win-win for both native bees and honeybees, right? If you think about this cool graphic, which shows sort of the life of a cavity nesting bee and the areas that it needs to move around in order to find all of its resources. Likewise, over here, there's a ground nesting bee flying around the city trying to find all of its resources as well. It depends on all of these different areas and has to fly a wide range to do that. If, for example, there was a honeybee hive that was sort of taking up the flowering shrubs for a portion of this bee's life cycle, it might impact its life, right? So creating habitat is a really good thing. Introducing honeybee hives may actually do the opposite of that. So the take home here, I think, is that honeybees, while they are fantastic and beautiful and wonderful and have a place in our world, when you are a beekeeper, you're not directly practicing wildlife conservation. I made this statement: honeybees are great, but we don't need more of them in the landscape to support bee conservation. If it's not done well, it actually may accomplish the opposite, right? It may increase competition, it may spread disease. And that's true for both honeybees and for native bees. They may be competing with honeybees and also competing with native bees and spreading diseases as well. If you are a beekeeper, it doesn't mean you need to stop being a beekeeper. That's not what I'm saying at all. I just think you need to do it for the right reason. And that reason is because it's a great hobby and they're beautiful animals and you can learn a ton from them and you can get honey from them. And they're great educational pieces, touch points as well. So there's a lot of really good things that comes from being a beekeeper, but I'm just suggesting don't get into it for conservation. And if you are a beekeeper, we're asking that you do so responsibly. It's not too different than, say, having a dog, right? Dogs are wonderful, beautiful animals. A lot of us have them, but they're not allowed in national parks. We put them on leashes when we go around other people. We control their impacts, right? I'm asking that we do the same thing with honeybees. Bug Life, which again is a European organization out of where honeybees are native, suggests that if you have a honeybee hive, you should be responsible for 5 acres of flowering habitat to help feed those animals. The average lot here in North America is around 1/2 acre, right? So that's a lot of habitat that most of us don't have. If you have honeybee hive, try to manage those mites and help ensure that you have healthy bees. This will help your bees from spreading diseases to native bees and also to other honeybees. Try to control swarms to avoid the establishment of feral colonies. Advocate for safe pest practices and bee-safe practices in your community, reducing pesticide use, increasing floral diversity in parks and gardens, embracing what we call the yarden. So not having to have a neat and tidy green lawn. All of these things are really important. To give you a sense of what 5 acres looks like, here's an average, urban lot, and that circle is 5 acres of habitat. So if you have honeybees, it's very likely that your honeybees are sort of traveling well beyond, your urban lot in order to feed. A few more pieces: keep densities low with honeybees. What are your neighbors doing? If they have honeybees, maybe it's not the best choice for you to become a beekeeper too. Also provide nesting and overwintering habitat for native bees, and consider your proximity to nature parks and natural areas and areas that are managed for wildlife protection. So explicitly, again, asking this question, where do honeybees belong? If they don't belong in a lot of these places, where should we be putting them? I think it's important to recognize that Jim Kane and Vince Tepedino about 5 years ago did this study that showed that a single honeybee hive over the course of 3 months extracts enough pollen from the landscape that would have supported 100,000 native bees over that same period of time. And it's important to recognize that over that 3-month period with our native bees, you're going to get a whole suite of different species that are going to emerge. They're only out for a couple weeks at a time. Some of them, maybe some of them are out for longer than that, but you get this sort of suite of different species that come out as the year progresses. So early plants, mid-season plants, and late season plants are all, important for different species of native bees. And so when we think about that, this amount of flowering resources supports 1 honeybee hive. This same amount of flowering resources provides resources for 100,000 native bees. So if you look at this under different scenarios, sort of in the upper left here, we have 2 times the flowering resources that we showed in that previous slide. So that could support both honeybees and native bees. No problem. We're in a good situation here, at least from a resource perspective. But if you're in an area that has seasonally abundant resources, so few early season and plentiful late season, you're going to probably lose some of those early season bees species that are only out for a couple weeks in the spring. Likewise, if you have limited resources year round, so this is sort of half the resources that are available here, you're going to lose probably a lot of your native bees. Again, honeybees are managed and can be fed from other sources. So it's likely the native bees that suffer first. And then if you're in an area that has, what we call shoulder season scarcity, where there's fewer plants in the spring and in the fall, you're going to lose some of your early and late native bee species. So ask yourself the question, are you comfortable putting, honeybees in any of these situations? Potentially in the abundant resources, situation. Although I think we need to think about, are there really areas with abundant resources? I think we don't really know this in many different situations. But when we think about sort of the different threats to flowering resources on the landscape, whether that be climate change or pesticides or grazing or invasive plants or increasing drought, in any given year, there might be plentiful resources, but sort of in the future, we don't know what's going to happen, or even in the following year. So making management decisions once for a long-term situation, can be dangerous. And so I want to liken this to a tragedy of the commons, right? Our natural areas and flowering areas are out there for everybody. They benefit humans, they benefit wildlife, they benefit native bees. And it's sort of if we take our honeybees and put them into these plentiful resource areas, it is a potential tragedy of the common situation where there's a high chance of acting contrary to the common good of all users, in other words, beekeepers and wild bees, by depleting or spoiling that resource through those actions. And so this is really important to think about, that we as human beings have an option here, right, of either doing this or not. And I think we need to be thinking about the long-term good of these natural areas and of these resources. And so in my mind, where do honeybees belong? Agricultural landscapes, without question. Agricultural landscapes are dependent on them, and vice versa. So we need to make our agricultural landscapes better for honeybees. We need to reduce chemical inputs in those areas. We need to increase non-crop flowering resources, and we need to support farming practices that are safe for bees. So look to organic, look to Be Better certified for those areas. In natural areas, I think there's a potential here as long as it's more than 2 miles from at-risk bee and at-risk plant species. I put a QR code here that is a link to Xerces sort of guide or recommendations for honeybees and natural areas. Okay, that was a lot of information. I know that I was talking probably too fast, and I'm sorry for that, but I had a lot that I really wanted to get through, and I hope that you all found it useful. And I want again to just hammer home here that I'm not trying to vilify honeybee keepers or honeybees. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about how we save bees and how we conserve bees. And in my mind, the best way to do that is to focus on habitat. Habitat is going to save honeybees or help honeybees as they pollinate our agricultural crops. And it's going to support our native bees and all these other ecosystems where we know they are so important. So thank you so much for your attention. And I will stick around for a while and answer any questions if there are. For those of you that have to leave right at 1, I'm sorry I presented right up until the to the boundary here, and you won't hear the answers to these questions, but we are recording this and we'll share the link with those of you that came today. So thanks so much, and I hope you all found that useful.
Thank you so much, Rich. That was a great presentation. A lot of information, but it was all really good and well-rounded. We have a lot of great questions. So as Rich said, we are going to go a bit over time with these, and it will be recorded on our YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of today. So I'm just going to dive right into the questions. The first one, what would you recommend to natural areas that do not keep bees, but honeybees are either traveling in or naturalized in the area? Is it too late to do anything about honeybees in order to protect native bees?
That's a great question, and I feel like living in the West, that I sort of think about these things differently than a lot of the East, where a lot of these different habitat types are sort of intermixed, and you can sort of, it's hard to keep honeybees out of natural areas. I think what the best thing to do in those situations where you have sort of a natural area that's close to where somebody may be keeping bees is just having an open, honest conversation about what that means, right? So engaging with the community around there and making sure that they're aware of what these impacts are and what these options are. Again, I don't think we need to vilify or suggest that people stop keeping bees, but I think we need to talk about what that means and what we should probably be doing closer to those honeybees so that they're not spilling over as much into our natural areas. I do think sort of feral honeybees is an interesting conversation to have. I think sort of at the density we find feral honeybees in most regions of North America, it's probably not a huge threat, right? That's probably the density at which things are okay. Honeybees can tolerate some interaction with honeybees. There's no question about that. I'm not worried about a lot of the situations. It's more these higher density, scarcer resource situations where it's an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What pollinators do the buzz pollination for the ag industry crops, and is industry involved in native pollinator conservation?
Everybody should be engaged in pollinator conservation because we are all dependent on it for food security. And I'll just I'll leave that part of it at that. The best buzz pollinators are bumblebees, especially at a farm scale. There are other species that do it. There are some, quite a few robust, large-bodied bees that do buzz pollinate, but bumblebees are the best of them. And there is a commercial bumblebee industry. I touched on this briefly, where we've sort of, and this has bloomed largely, to my understanding, from sort of greenhouse tomato production, that we sort of learned that buzz pollination benefited tomato production. So we learned how to grow bees in boxes and then ship them to greenhouses and for open field pollination. And so there is some of this that's going on. I think, hopefully you all learned throughout the course of this that shipping commercial bees all over the country has likely spread and amplified diseases that have had a significant impact on our native bees. So, I think there's ways to do this. There's a number of scientists in the last year or so have written a white paper about creating a clean stock program and making sure that these animals that are getting shipped out all over the country are truly disease-free. But I don't think industry's quite there yet, at least as far as I understand it. We sort of need independent testing and to understand better where these animals are getting shipped. And I haven't been a part of those open conversations if they're happening. That doesn't mean that they're not, but I haven't been engaged with those, and I don't know of anybody that has. So I think the industry is aware of this issue. Like literally, it was a disease outbreak that has stopped the production of a species that was once commercially available, and that's actually the Western bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis, used to be commercially available. A disease outbreak has actually completely stopped the production of that species. So they know that the effects that this can have, and so they're interested in it. I hope we can get more engaged in the long term and figure out a better solution to that problem.
Definitely. All right, next question. Is there a safe, ethical way to keep backyard bees without worrying about them taking resources from or spreading pathogens to native bees?
I think the safe, ethical way to do it is to provide a ton of habitat for your bees. If you have a backyard beehive and you've got a huge flower garden in your front and your backyard, and you're providing as many flower resources as you can, I think you can feel okay about it. Dogs are not great for a lot of these things either, and a lot of us have dogs. But I think the analogy is like with our dogs, we usually fence them and keep them in our own backyards, and that's a lot harder to do with honeybees. But again, I don't want to vilify people that are doing this. They're amazing. Honeybees are truly amazing creatures. They're beautiful and they're really fun to be around. And I know a lot of people are, intimately connected with them. I don't think you need to feel guilty if you're doing all of those other things that I said, which is like creating habitat, talking with your neighbors and making sure they don't also have honeybees, and doing all these things. I think as a community, I think is really the best way to approach it. But for instance, like here in Portland, there are very few regulations on honeybee hives. Like a single person can have 4 hives on a half-acre lot here in Portland, and like everybody on the block could do the same thing. And in Europe, even where honeybees are native, like they're worried about honeybee densities in cities, like even where honeybees are native. So I do think we need to take this on at a community level, and just making a decision for yourself, has the opportunity for that tragedy of the common situation. But, we can also work as a community to increase resources and decrease chemical inputs. And so, there are opportunities to do this at a community level. And if you're not sort of familiar with our Bee City, program, it's an opportunity to sort of work as a community to engage in these issues in a way that I think we can all feel good about.
Definitely. So we have a couple of people asking, we've talked about honeybees not being native to the US. There's just questions of what do you define as being non-native, and how do we know for sure that honeybees are not to the US?
I mean, they just weren't here. There's plenty of research looking at fossil records and native bees going back. There's documented records of Europeans bringing honeybees over in the 1600s, multiple different occasions. And at that time, they weren't in sort of South America. They've spread down there since. So, I think we've, native, I think, would mean sort of here before humans brought them here, at least to me. Non-native would be introduced by humans, or human action of some sort, whether it was an intentional or unintentional. Those are the difference between native and non-native to me. And Yeah, they've been here a long time now. They've been here, 400 years or so. So there's been a long-term relationship with them, but they're not native here. I don't think anyone would. They're naturalized. I think we could say they're naturalized, but they're not native. They weren't here before we brought them here.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
All right, this is a longer question. It's a good one, so I want to ask it. So since Big Ag land used to be wildland, does it still make sense for us to try to rebuild habitat on large scale agricultural land? Or is it best to keep Big Ag separate from native habitat, especially if there are commercial honeybees brought in to pollinate crops? For example, would it be helpful or harmful to plant native habitat near or under giant almond orchards? Big Ag, if managed properly, seems like a turnkey resource for rebuilding native habitat, but would that just create a population sink, or would it help diversity, including honeybee health?
Fantastic question. No simple answer. The answer is it depends. I think, unfortunately, it depends on how that agricultural landscape is managed, right? If we put a ton of flowering plants underneath an almond orchard and then don't follow, sort of smart pest management practices, and we just spray the almond orchard with an airplane with an insecticide on it, that's gonna serve as a population sink. But if we can work with farmers to have smart, incentive economic based thresholds for pesticide use, IPM programs that are really following, and by IPM I mean integrated pest management programs that are supportive and safe for bees, I think there's really good evidence that putting native habitat on farms is really good. Not only is it good for native bees, but it's actually, there's good evidence in a lot of different crop systems that if there's sufficient native habitat on or near a farm, that native bees will actually provide 100% of pollination services for that crop for free, right? So that means that a farmer can actually, have native habitat and not have to spend money on honeybees. So it's, there's a potential positive trade-off for biodiversity, and then also for farm economics, there. So, and how those things work out, it's obviously a trade-off, because then they're losing, crop production, and but maybe yield goes back up. So there's a lot of intricacies here, but I think the important piece here is that we recognize that the current agricultural system is probably not sustainable for honeybees, right? And so we as a society need to figure out how to farm better. And since farmers are dependent on these honeybees and other pollinators for their services, we should really be engaged in this work together. And there are so many farmers around this country and around this world that are actively engaged in this work and that are moving the needle in the right direction. We've come a long way. The Xerces Society has been working on farms for the last 25 years, helping to increase and has probably come close to impacting a million acres, across North America, and improving farm practices for bees. We just need to get even bigger than that, and keep moving that needle in the right direction. I hope that answers the question. It's a good one, a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, next question. This person's neighbor is going to start beekeeping next year, and they're concerned about competition with native bees and insects. Where can they find resources showing that native plants in their region are less attractive to honeybees, and maybe prefer that they leave other native plants for native bees instead, and they are in the Midwest, Great Plains area, in an urban area?
Yeah, good question. I think the best thing to do is to focus on growing diverse native plants. That doesn't guarantee you're not going to get a ton of honeybees in your yard. You might still, but honeybees love, when there's one hyper abundant resource, that's when honeybees are at their best, because they can find that resource, because there's so many of them. and then they can go back to the hive and communicate, there's this great resource over in this direction. Let's all go there. We can learn how to extract it really rapidly and find it. So things like, clover is a good example of this. Honeybees love clover. It's often hyperabundant, and they'll take advantage of it. But if you have a diversity of size and shapes, some of those plants are going to probably not be visited by honeybees and will be available for native bee species. But they'll also benefit the honeybees too, which is important. So I think that's the best approach, is to really focus on native plants. Honeybees aren't from here. They didn't evolve with the plants that are here. So they evolved in Europe. So a lot of our invasive plants are attractive to honeybees, and they visit them readily. So planting native plants will help our native specialist and generalist bees.
All right, and I think this next
Thanks for
question
doing
is, I think this next question is important. Are mason bees that you purchase at seed suppliers and garden centers not recommended? And is this contributing to the spread of pathogens?
Yeah, great question. I think it probably depends. But generally speaking, I, as a practitioner, speaking for myself, I would not buy and move bees around. I don't think it's good practice. If you sort of go back and look at conservation stories that begin with a human being moving an animal somewhere, there are very few of those conservation stories that end well, if any, except for maybe the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone. But yeah, we don't know what species are in those packets. Sometimes there may be non-native species, and you may actually be introducing non-native species to your yard. And you very well may be introducing pathogens. A lot of these tunnel nesting bees and mason bees, while they live in those cavities, they often don't, in the wild, they often don't live at such high densities as we put them in. And those high density areas can actually facilitate disease transmission. So yeah, I would say, my advice would be to focus on, I think the other problem with moving bees around is you may actually be introducing them into an environment that's unsuitable for them. There may not be enough flowering resources, right? And so if we focus on the creation of habitat first, with the idea that build it and they will come, when they show up, that will mean that the resources are plentiful in that area to support those bees. So I think focusing on habitat creation should really be the focus. Now, along with that, I think it's okay to put out nesting resources for those bees. So instead of, putting out the bees themselves, you could buy one of those bee blocks, that supports mason bees. And then when they show up in your yard, because you have habitat, they'll have nesting places too. So I think that would be my focus.
Thank you. So someone asked about the Pacific Northwest Bumblebee Atlas, and obviously they're an Atlas volunteer. Thank you, Paul, for asking this. But they noticed that in the survey you ask if honeybees are present in the area and if there's any data to show any correlation between native bumblebee abundance and honeybees.
That is a great question. We have been actually grappling with this we're now in 15 states for our Atlas programs, and we're sort of trying to think about how to better collect data to address this question. I don't think we're quite there with the sort of qualitative data that we've collected. I appreciate you recognizing what we're trying to get at there and asking the question. It's a good one, but I don't think we quite have the data to address it. But I do think we're gonna potentially try to improve that so we can think about these things. But there is some, outside of Atlas data, there is some good evidence that that large-bodied bees, like bumblebees, particularly ones that tend to visit the same sort of resources that honeybees do, right? Honeybees bumblebees are generalists as well. They're large-bodied, so they're visiting largely the same plants that honeybees are, because they're roughly the same size, at least workers are. So there is some evidence that it actually can sometimes be bumblebees that can be first competitively excluded at high densities. That's not true in all situations. It's likely not true in most of our natural areas, but there is some evidence that bumblebees can be uniquely susceptible to competition, and frankly, disease transmission from honeybees.
Okay, great. So this question I think is interesting. It has obviously a more complicated answer, but what are some of the native species of bees other than honeybees that are considered endangered that are not yet listed?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of them. There's, with 3,600 species here in North America, there's so many species that we don't even know, like where they live or their life history. There's so little information out there. A lot of these species are native to the southwestern United States, and they emerge at the same time as a single or a few different plant species, and like studying their, finding them, let alone studying their population size, is really, really challenging. There is a poppy bee in Southern California that has been petitioned for endangered species protection, that seems to be in decline. There's some efforts to go out and find that next year. That I just saw. They're hiring a bunch of field technicians. So if you're interested in sort of living in Logan, Utah, and spending some time in the deserts looking for a poppy bee next spring, I think they're hiring 10 field technicians or something like that to go out and look for that species. Sounds like a great job for me. I'm thinking about asking for a leave of absence. No,
I was going to say, you're going to stay with Xerces, right, Rich?
I was going to say, Scott, if you're out there, I'm kidding. Serena, I'm kidding. It does sound fun. And a lot of the other species that are out there that we sort of know about tend to be some of the better studied species. And those are bumblebees for the most part. A lot of work has been done on them, so we sort of know their status. And there's a number of bumblebee species that have been petitioned for endangered species protection. I mentioned the western bumblebee. It's been petitioned. The American bumblebee, Bombus pennsylvanicus, which I think once upon a time was native to like 40 states in North America, has also been petitioned for endangered species protection. Bombus fraternus, the southern plains bumblebee, has been petitioned for endangered species protection. That's native largely to the Great Plains and southeastern United States. The Suckley cuckoo bumblebee, which is actually a kind of a nest parasite bumblebee, really interesting life history that you can go watch another webinar to understand better, has been petitioned for endangered species status. And I may be missing one or two other bumblebee species. But those are, the ones that we really know about. I think, Xerces is diving into this work right now to really better understand the status of some of our native bees. And I think there's a nationwide understanding that these data are lacking, and we need to do a better job, sort of working on these. And so there's an effort being led by Hollis Woodard out of UC Riverside with a bunch of other collaborators to establish a native bee monitoring network, across the country that can do a better job of assessing the status of these animals so that we can enact on the ground conservation action. And, for those of you that are, engaged with the Bumblebee Atlas Project, first of all, thank you. But, that's the purpose of those as well, is to really get a better idea of what's going on and to better understand the status of our native bumblebees so that we can advocate for protection when and where it's needed.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah.
Okay. So, probably go to about a half hour, so we have time for a few more questions. This one's kind of a hard one. In your opinion, is it worse to try to let this person's backyard honeybee hive die out by not using any mite treatment, or to do chemical treatments and potentially prolong the life of the colony and maybe end up with swarming or feral bee colonies?
I don't feel qualified to answer that question, and I'm just going to say it. I don't keep bees. And I don't know best practices. I'm not engaged in the latest and best research. My gut would say, having diseased bees and having them interacting with other bees in the area sounds like a really bad idea, particularly if they might swarm and move off and spread those things further afield. But I would suggest that you engage with a local beekeeper or beekeeping association. I think those folks are super educated. They understand the issues, and I think they can best help you understand how to manage that situation. And they're frankly much more qualified to do so than I am. And I would trust their opinions.
All right. This question is hard. A few people have asked kind of in the similar vein of it. But Fran is wondering, what should they do? Their neighbor is hosting many hives for a commercial beekeeping company, but does not provide any habitat for honeybees. Should they ask them to reduce the number of hives? They feel that their honeybees are overwhelming their efforts to provide habitat for native bees in their own yard.
Yeah, that sounds like a hard situation. I don't know what I would do in that situation, other than try to engage in a real conversation about this. I mean, I think this whole issue is so complicated because everybody, I think, is engaged in it for the right reason, right? We all want to make a difference. And so this person that's hosting those commercial hives very likely feels that they're contributing and making the situation better. And they are for that beekeeper. So it's like it's really a tricky situation. But I think the best thing that we can do is sort of engage as a community and talk about that tragedy of the commons idea, right? That like just benefiting one species, honeybees, at the potential detriment to other species and other communities I don't think it's in the long-term interest. And so it's a hard conversation to have. Like, I was nervous this morning having it to all of you, and I don't even have to see your faces. Like, I don't even know what your reactions are. So having this with your neighbor that you have to share a fence line with or see, on a daily basis is not an easy thing to do. But I think if there's one thing that we can all take from the last, 6 to 10 years of living in America is like, we need to have these conversations. Like, we need to engage across, get out of our bubbles and talk to other people about things. And hopefully what I've done for you today is given you some of that, information to help have that conversation, to facilitate that conversation. And I think we've provided at Xerces a number of other resources, to help you there. And I will say that we were hoping to have a publication to come out sort of concurrently with this presentation that's going to talk about these issues and sort of put them on paper, that, to have a fact sheet that you could share. And that document is still in production. It will likely be out, sooner rather than later. So we hope to have more resources in your hands for these issues moving forward. And this webinar would also be recorded, and you're welcome to share it and have them watch it as well. I think that's the best thing that you can do. But I agree, it's a tough situation, and I don't envy your position.